Evening guys, I have a really interesting saw to show you tonight. Loads of messages from people about the S10 that is being put up for sale, and so apologies, the video's a little late, but hopefully worth waiting for. So this is the gorgeous Stihl S10, and I brought a few other saws out just briefly, just to put her in a timeline which makes sense. So in CC order out today then is the S10 along with the 08 56 cc's. You've got the Stihl 041 61 cc's. You have the Stihl 07 75 cc's. Then you'd have the beautiful 050 89 cc's. You'll have the BLK 57 98 cc's, and then the Contra 106 cc's. And the reason I brought those out is because the Contra was the change point for Stihl. Before the Contra, all Stihl saws were gear driven, and so the BLK is sitting in front of her from 1954, 98 cc's, spectacular saw. Unusual in that it's two methods of starting. If one failed, you could put a pull cord around the back and you could still start it, hence adopted by the military. Then, so from 54, the Contra from 59, her baby sister as they call it, the 07, started life in 61, and then in 63 the 08s came about, and then 63. Interesting then, the 041 61 cc's, 66 67. Interesting, some literature anomalies on the Stihl 041, but 66 67. And then in 68 the spectacular 50, and also the spectacular and rare Stihl S10. So shares a huge number of parts. Ostensibly it is a 08 47mm piston, this version 47, both 56 cc's, and pull start housing the same, the clutch cover same with the oil tank, handle looks the same but it's actually about 30mm shorter. The exhaust is smaller, a bit stubbier, and has I think the outlet of the exhaust is slightly restricted. And then you get to the real changes. So the rear handle has been bolted on at the back, so where the rear foot is on the fuel tank, Stihl have managed to put a hole through, which then is the lower support for the rear handle, and then it bolts to the back. Engine shroud different, air filter covers different, rear handle then different, and these then run an HL62 carburetor, so one of the little smaller squares, as opposed to the 114 I think on the 08s, where they're the stacked round carburetor body with the pump chamber and then the metering and diaphragm. So bigger intake, smaller intake, slightly bigger exhaust on the output, slightly smaller on the S10. And so this, I'm not sure if this is Stihl's first home consumer saw, but this was marketed as a home consumer saw. So they're just beautiful, but they're only a very small window. So I think from 68 to 73 thereabouts, so 4 or 5 years, and they're really, really rare. Hard to see them complete like this. So this girl's complete. A couple people asked, how does she run? I'm going to show her running. And so running a genuine period 17-inch, so that's the longest they spec'd for this particular girl, 17-inch solid nose bar. I was very fortunate to buy this is an Atkins chain, really unusual. A lot of people hadn't even heard of them. And Atkins were a part of the BW Corporation, so part of Borg Warner, a huge corporation, and this chain is stamped BW, and it could also be Borg Warner had many affiliations, and so it could have been with one of their other companies, Morse. But this is also stamped 463, which is the 404 chain, 1.6mm gauge, and this was supplied by Atkins. So it's a period, vintage, brand new chain. Let me show you how this girl runs. Momentary slider switch which touches the touches an earth to the coil, and so this girl had a pull start rebuild just as a matter of course, and a new pull cord. She had some bearing on the HT lead, so she's had a new HT lead put on her, and brand new chain. I had a mint 404 sprocket, period. Clutch drum all looks excellent on her, and so that is it so far. And how does she cut? Well, we thought we've got to save the first cut for camera, and I've been itching for days since putting the chain on to want to show her cutting, so I thought, you know, let's show her cutting today. So she's up for sale as a collector's item. So I've got to make that crystal clear for people up front, because she is at least 50 years old, and possibly just over, and they're just so difficult to replace. So, you know, if you're genuinely interested in having a beautiful example of an S10, then I'd like to think this is one. And I took off the exhaust, the piston is lovely, and I guess, you know, she might need, if you're going to put her back into service, you might want to do a carburetor service on her and change the I did check the fuel pickup and it all looks clean, and she's running nicely. So I've got just some small conifer. Let's take a few discs. Hopefully that'll answer the rest of the questions. It's a very exciting day to run the S10. Very hard to get horsepower figures. The early S8 or 08s were making, the early guys were slightly different again, 44 with 44, 34. They made around the 3 horsepower, so I'm presuming this with the extra restrictions is probably around the 3 horsepower. Okay guys, let's see how this girl performs. It's a beautiful, beautiful period chain. Absolutely brand new vintage Atkins BW 404 chain. So bear in mind, she might need adjusting. I have a screwdriver. If she starts to lean out, we can always adjust her. Thought I was hitting something metal for a second. It's just a really, really big knot. So I was just powering off for safety. Well, if anything, sounds slightly rich, doesn't she now? So, so ever so interesting cutting with that saw, because that's obviously only smallish wood. Is that 7 or 8 inches across, and you can tell not quite the power of her slightly older sister, the 08. Let's just see how this sounds in comparison. Bit of choke. Yeah, interesting. Just perhaps, again, larger air intake, larger opening for the exhaust, bigger carburettor, obviously makes slightly more power. And then the home user version, where they just toned those things down slightly. Interesting as well, actually, because of course the 08 is running a flap on the flywheel for a governor, and this girl actually has the moulding in the crankcase for the governor arm and assembly, but is not fitted, so this doesn't have the governor on her. Right, let's take one more cut of something slightly bigger. It's just amazing, again, when you've not cut with a saw, and the saw is 50 plus years old, and yeah, she's just back in service. I've got to say, out of the two, I absolutely love the shape of the S10. It reminds me of some sloping old 1960s hot rod car. Just think it's a thing of beauty.